Paul, what do you recall about the on-site decorating of Spode ware in the early 19th century? How was Henry Daniel's business organised on the Spode site?
I understand it. The Spodes first of all started off making earthenware and developed underglazed print and to the quality that they did. And then Spode created the recipe for bone china. Largely because, unlike people who pursued porcelain, there were many attempts at making successful porcelain, like the Chinese did, failed. Largely because controlling the kilns, and because they didn't have any technical means of controlling temperatures and things like that, all sorts of reasons why it wouldn't work. But in that case, most of them had animal bone in them of some proportion. The Cookworthy patent, I think, was also one of the elements. But it was always a strong desire to be in the UK. Spode was an earthenware producer, and as I've said before, I was involved with the porcelain manufacturer at Worcester. It's a difficult material to work with, even today. But the sequence of producing earthenware is it's fired, the first firing after it's been made in clay is the highest temperature it will go at. All clay, when it's fired at a very high temperature, has a point at which it becomes pyroplastic, it gets wobbly, and it has to be supported in a kiln by what's called setters. They're basically formers that hold it into shape. So when it goes wobbly and shrinks, which it does, it's held into a decent shape. Once you've got that, that's as hard and firm as it's going to be. It's at biscuit stage. You then can decorate it under glaze and glaze it afterwards to bring out the blue. Or you can decorate it under glaze and paint it, or all sorts of things. But all subsequent processes have less loss because you haven't got this wobbly effect. Nothing is distorts. Bone china was the effort, that sort of, based on, pottery manufacturers don't like to experiment too much. They're good at what they do, and if they mess about, they always say you don't change your glaze and your clay at the same time. You just don't mess about. But understanding the market was potentially there for a porcelain lookalike, wanted to produce it in the same sequence as he did, which is fired at a high temperature first, then glazed and then decorated. And the mix he came up with, which has bone ash in, and the firing temperature he put it at, allowed him to do that. And he became very good at holding it stable, making a white substrate, which came out much better than anyone expected. It was very white, translucent, and looked beautiful. He called it Stoke China in the early. This is Josiah the First in the early days. When he died, which was about 1797, I think, his son, who has been the London end of the business, came back to the factory. That must have been a shock, coming out of London and back to Stoke. But he saw the potential for it, but decided to change it to bone china rather than porcelain, although they did use the word porcelain occasionally in some of the manufacturing. But he didn't have a decorating facility of that sort. They were fundamentally an underglaze printing and a potter, a whiteware potter. So it made sense to actually bring in as a partner somebody who had the technology, the knowledge and the skills to decorate on glaze on that material. They must have been practicing on porcelain or something before, because they wouldn't have come afresh with no knowledge whatsoever. They must have been somebody that Spode knew had the means of decorating ware. Because a lot of porcelain used to be painted in London, used to be decorated in London, so perhaps that's where he started, I don't know. But it was set up in a strange way. He had an area of the factory and 3 kilns built. It's literally in front where the back lodge is now, and where that restaurant is, where the 3, you can see it on the old map that exists. But Spode used to sell to Daniel the whiteware. He would decorate it in great secrecy and all that stuff, and then sell it back as a finished product to Spode. That's how I understood the transactions went. But that was more or less what he did. It was a separate business within the Spode organisation. What happened then, I don't know, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Spode started to learn how the things were done, because people will move around if they're offered a bit more money. But at some point, after about, I think about 20 years, that went on. Although I could be wrong on that. Henry Daniel went off and set up his own business, H&R Daniels. I think he had a son involved.
Yeah.
And Spode continued producing decorated Chinaware himself, with some very strong designs.
So would the Daniel kilns have been used in the Spode business, do you think?
It's entirely possible. They,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have knocked them down. I mean, they were there on pictures of the... There's a model made of the factory. I don't know who did it and why, but there's a model in the museum which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And the bottle kilns are there, and they're there on subsequent drawings that I've seen. It would have been necessary, because the kiln technology was, kiln knowledge was also critically important in those days. You could have a couple of kiln firings. You can imagine filling a whole kiln and firing it once, and it was like 2 weeks worth of work, and it'd go wrong. I mean, you'd only need a couple of those and your business would go bump. So the kilnmen were critical in that area. And managing your own, they wouldn't have been able to manage their own kilns and fire earthenware at the same time. So it was a different requirement. Fundamentally the same, but different in how they did it.
And as I understand, in the 19th century, as you were intimating earlier, the earthenware business was kept very separate from the relatively new China clay business.
Yeah, they had separate production streams and decorating areas and so on, because the earthenware is fundamentally under the glaze, different kilns and firing. Obviously, all that changed a lot during when it was the Clean Air Act came in, and they had to have electric kilns and all sorts of different technology for firing things. So there was more interchangeability. But
fundamentally, for 100 years or so, it would have been.
But they were definitely separate. I mean, we had separate clay making facilities, separate printing and decorating facilities, and gilding was. A lot of these things were different areas of the factory, and in a stream there had to be a sort of logical flow from clay through glazing to decoration and dispatch.
Very good. Thanks for watching. Did you find this clip interesting? If you did, please like and leave a comment. Thanks to Paul Wood for his time and the Daniel Ceramic Circle for the research that they have carried out. Look out for more clips of my interview with Paul on the Potteries author channel.